go ahead and start, because I actually do talk about cover crops
Okay.
in the presentation. Okay.
Go outside. Go on, outside, go potty. Go on.
Okay.
Outside, go potty.
The main thing to remember about the fall is, I mean, it's a good time to actually plant things. And even though your nurseries may not have the same variety of things to buy, it's because you're putting it in when you're gonna, it's already gonna rain and everything. It's a good idea to plant new things, but especially perennials, of course, bulbs for, you know, spring blooms. And it's great for shrubs and trees because they need to expand their root system. And they do that during the winter.
See you later.
So it's best to put a lot of things in the fall as opposed to, say, the spring. I've even planted things in the winter, but that's another story. The other thing, it's a good time to test your soil. And soil testing, you know, you can get one of the simple soil test kits that are sold at Home Depot or whatever. And they just have little plastic containers with pills in them. And you just collect a sample of your soil and put it in there with some water and follow the instructions and put in your little tab, and it will test for the particular nutrient as well as acidity or alkalinity. And in my case, mine tends to be too acid, so I sometimes will add some lime unless it's around things that are acid-loving plants. And acid-loving plants include rhododendrons, blueberries, hydrangeas. If it's too alkaline, which would be unusual for our area here, you add some sort of sulfur compound material. The other thing, obviously, is cleaning up and then putting mulch down. Now, the thing to remember is if you're going to put mulch down, and if you need fertilizer, and this is, you know, why you should do a soil test early, so you know if you need a certain type of fertilizer, put the fertilizer down before you put the mulch down. So, because the idea is get the fertilizer down to the roots. So I have a tendency to try and remember, you know, to think early about getting my fertilizer down before I started putting my mulch down. And one of the things you can do is you want to collect your spent foliage for things that drop leaves and look really messy. In some cases, you can just leave it until early spring and then clean it up, because there's a lot of insects, good insects, and other things that actually live in that spent foliage. So another thing you should think about, if you leave a lot of spent foliage on the ground, you may want to use a fertilizer that has a higher nitrogen content. And that's usually what here in Oregon, our Oregon gardens, we usually need the higher nitrogen content fertilizer. And what to use? You can use leaves. I do. I also have an oak tree, but I only use those leaves for certain uses because oak leaves take a long time to break down. Pine needles are good. And of course, if you have a good compost, or you can buy it, that is a good mulch as well. Now, I have things like blueberries and strawberries. For blueberries, you want to make sure you mulch the base pretty well and use a heavy mulch such as wood chips. And that's to protect them from freezing because they have shallow roots. Strawberries, you just put the mulch, you know, over the strawberry bed and wait until they actually start to die, you know, the leaves start to die off in your strawberry patch. Peonies, they start to look pretty frumpy. And so as well as your iris and lilies and things. So when they really start to look bad, you could cut those back. One suggestion I have for coneflowers and black-eyed Susans, they will form seed heads and birds and things like to eat those. And for some people, they lend an interest to the garden. In some cases, they just look messy. So it's up to you whether you cut those back or not. And for perennials such as hostas, lilies, irises, and the upright growing sedums, this is a good time to divide them before all their leaves die back. And it's the way to do it is you dig up the entire root ball and take a sharp shovel and just like cut them in half or into quarters, depending on how big it is. And then you have 2 plants for the price of 1. So you can take the 1/2 that you've cut off and plant it elsewhere. So that's one way to expand your garden. And this is the time, it's one of the best times to do it because you have the winter time to allow all those roots to grow. And when you plant, you know, the cut off portions, treat them just like a new plant. So you give them some fertilizer, water them well, all that, and they should do pretty well because they're hardy plants anyway.
Hey, Ginny,
Yeah.
what's an upright sedum? Is that like a hens and chicks? Or
No, hens and chicks is not there. These are the sedums that grow tall. You know, when the flowers like those, the pink flowered ones that are out now, that's an upright sedum. And they usually grow about, you know, a good 12 to 24 inches tall. So hens and chickens, you can almost sort of divide those anytime because they're pretty tough little plants. And, but in terms of for expanding low growing sedums, I do it this time of year too. Now, like I said, this is a good time. Okay, pruning. Pruning is something you have to kind of look up the particular plant that you're pruning, but make sure you wait until your leaves drop off or late fall, because if you prune actually now, it's a little early and we still could have a warm spell, and that encourages immediate growth that later is susceptible to frost. So what you can cut out now is stuff that's already dead or diseased. You can do that now. But for my bushes and trees, I'll wait until well into October before I start to prune those. So yeah, some plants you should even wait until late winter or very early spring. That's true of crepe myrtle. Now, vegetable gardens, what you're doing now is tidying up from the spent things. Now, I have a zucchini plant that's still going, and I think I'm going to rip it out anyway because I have enough zucchini. But what you do is literally just rip them out by the roots. And what can be important, and for you, those of you who have lots over at Lusher Farms, you want to keep notes of what you planted where. Because, for instance, tomatoes, you should next year, don't plant them in the same place, move them around. So that, you know, just keep, I just get a piece of graph paper and write down where things were planted and what was planted. And this is obviously the good time to plant what we call cool weather veggies in place of that. And that's like kale, onions, garlic, and certain types of beans. And since my garden, not only my vegetable garden, but the rest, all over my property, I have garlic. And that is, I inherited from the previous owner, which is okay because he planted good garlic. But so what I do is I just leave some of the garlic plants in the ground and then they come up the next year. And we started talking about cover crops, and this is a good time. What's important is to get the cover crop in before we have a freeze, because you want the cover crop to get established before it freezes. And so it's right now is a good time to put your cover crop in your beds. So take out your summer spent veggies and then get your cover crop on top of that. And some people ask me where to buy the seeds for cover crops. I either get them over at 7Ds or I get it at Concentrates over in Milwaukee. Okay, next slide. Okay, the next.
Ginny, can I say something before you move on?
Yeah.
On the crop rotation,
Mm-hmm.
I have an app called growveg.com, and it's fun because you draw a little map of your garden and you click on the plants and you show where you're going to plant them, and it tells you how many will fit, but it keeps track year after year so that you can avoid planting in the same place, you know, or
Right.
like if you had tomatoes, but you also have peppers and they're in the same family, it knows that. So it directs you to a different place to plant it. You know, I end up just kind of going randomly like I garden, but it is fun to attempt to have a strategy.
Can you say the name of that app again, Ellen?
It's called GrowVeg, GROWVEG.com. And it's a fun little app. And then if you get it, then you get this weekly email and a video from the guy who runs it named Benjamin Van Heem. And he's this charming British man who's always talking about his compost and showing you how to prune things and do things. It's fun.
Great, thanks.
Good. The other thing is to remember about your potted plants and things like that, or you could create some potted plants. So if you have some delicate potted plants, now's the time to bring in either inside or someplace that is pretty sheltered so you don't have problems with freezing. I put out, for instance, my begonias, you know, in the summer in the shade, but I have potted begonias and then I bring them in the winter. And so they stay happy. Some people even bring in they have like potted geraniums and things like that. You can do that too. I don't, because I don't like the smell. The other thing you can do, if you have parsley or basil out in your garden, you can dig it up and pot it and bring it inside and grow it inside all winter. So that's, you know, one of the things the nice things about being able to grow your different seasonings and stuff. And there's some things that you could actually thyme and some of the other things you can plant now. And because thyme's pretty hardy, and you know, some of your hardier things you can put out in the garden now, and they'll keep growing during the winter. Since our winters have been getting less and less harsh, I find a lot of things will do fine outside and come back in the spring.
Ginny, Janet was talking yesterday about a tomato plant that people could do inside. Janet, do you want to just mention what that one was?
We've grown sun golds inside. Just bring them in and they keep going for a while. It was in a south-facing sunroom.
Yes.
It was a lot of fun.
I mean, the one thing to remember is they'll need as much sun as they can get,
Oh, yeah.
as you can give them. And just as an aside, for instance, in my house, when I renovated it, I have, my windows don't let in a lot of, a lot of sun. I have, you know, so I have double pane windows and all this sort of stuff, and they have, coverings on them and stuff to keep out the sun. And so as a result, anything that requires sun, I can't grow inside. So, but some people have nice sunny places that they can keep their plants. So just be aware that things will probably get a little leggy when you bring them inside. So the other thing is, it's a good time, obviously, to sharpen your hand tools and wipe them down with oil or WD-40 or something. That's just so they don't rust. And take care of your outdoor furniture, you know, either cover it, bring it in, whatever. And I don't have a lawnmower, but if you have something like that, there's things that you're supposed to do for winter storage. So, of course, around here, we tend to have to mow all year round. So some people never put their lawnmowers away.
Garden.
Okay.
And
do we have, do we have some
so
questions?
this year I've decided I'm going to do cover crops over the winter,
Yes.
and I'm going to do some winter crops. So is there any conflict with that? I mean, I've got a section where I'm doing some beets and butternut squash. And also I put some onion sets in because Ellen sent me to the store where they were cheap, but they're already popping up. So, okay, my first question is, can I do some cover crops next to where I'm growing those
Yes.
butternuts?
Yeah.
No
Because
problem.
a lot of your cover crops, what they do is they fix nitrogen. And so your veggies like the nitrogen.
Okay.
So all I recommend is obviously keep a small area around the stems clear, but otherwise go ahead.
Around the stems of my of what I'm growing.
Yes.
Okay. I'll isolate it as much as possible. So just a couple of things that I'm gonna try over the winter. And I got clover. So
Oh, good. Yeah.
yeah. So
Clover's easy. You just toss it and it does its thing.
I love it. And let's see, I think, wait a minute, see if I had another question. No.
What do you use as a cover crop, Ginny?
I use crimson clover. So, I mean, there's a lot of different things. The reason I like crimson clover is because it has a pretty, blossom when it goes to flower, and it's short. So when you want to turn it over in the spring, it's easier to work into the soil than some of the other crops.
Good.
So when you do fava beans as a cover crop,
Yeah.
Do you chop up the plant and turn that in, or do you just rip them out and think it helped the soil just because it was there?
If you can turn it in, I would, I'd turn it in. Because when you think about it, well, the nitrogen fixation happens at the roots. So I know my nephew uses fava beans, and he tends to cut it first and then turn it in. But he'll use what he's cut as mulch, because you know, he uses mulch a lot just so he doesn't have to water as much.
You mean he just lays it on the top of the soil and doesn't turn it in, just lays it there to
Yeah.
suppress weeds?
Yeah. Because it'll break down too, eventually.
How about buckwheat? Do you have an opinion on buckwheat?
The only thing you know, I've never used buckwheat myself. I've only seen it, and it, to me, you know, it's kind of like fava beans. It grows pretty high. It can grow pretty high. Yeah. So it's hard to turn in. So you have to cut it first before you turn it into the soil. I was afraid somebody was going to ask me about roses. And I purposely don't have roses because hybrid roses are very high maintenance, and I don't want to deal with it.
Go ahead, CB.
So my garden is a 4x8 plot in a community garden spot. And so when you get, I was thinking about the cover crop of the clover. Can you get smaller amounts, or do you have to like buy it by the pound?
No, if you go to 7Ds,
Okay.
tell them how big your plots are, and they'll give you measure out. They'll ask you how much you want, and just tell them, look, I got a 4x8 plot.
Okay, great, thanks. And the rest of my stuff's in pots on a northeast facing balcony. So I just am unable to think of what can grow out there in my balcony when it's going to be 115. Just not in a good mood here.
It just means you have to water them a lot.
Right.
In
Right.
the
Well,
summer.
actually, things survived much better. I mean, the ferns survived, and I don't know quite how that happened on the balcony, but
It's because they didn't get afternoon sun.
right, exactly. I get morning sun,
Yes.
and it's lovely, and I'm so happy to have the balcony, and I've lost a fair amount of plants, and now I'm trying to figure out what to do next. So we'll see.
I mean, something like parsley or something like that might do well out there.
The parsley didn't, I only had, on the balcony, I tried one pot of parsley, and it just never did well. And so, but I don't think it was in a big enough pot.
Okay.
So I will, because I just heard fabulous things about how healthy parsley was yesterday.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a lot of things you can grow in pots, but you do have to make sure it's big enough for whatever you want to grow it in. And you have to water more often.
Yes.
Now, one of the things too I like to talk about is when we start to have, nights where it's freezing. Around here, it's usually isn't too bad. It's when you're going to have freezing temperatures for a couple days in a row. Then I start running out and putting more mulch on things that I think are going to freeze, or I'll use coverings to actually put over certain plants that I think may be delicate. So it just depends. In the spring, when you grow things in pots, one thing you should remember, even ones that are outside and stuff, you should take off the first top inch of soil and put in good soil, and obviously fertilize them so they're ready to grow for the spring and summer. They call it redressing of potted plants.
So what do you do sometimes when I buy a plant that's in a pot
Mhm.
or band pot, the roots are all wrapped around the outside,
Yeah.
and I always kind of claw at them to loosen them up. But, like, I've known some people that cut the bottom off. I mean, how much clawing do I need to completely get those roots free, or can I just get what's the best practice?
Okay, there's actually some research going on about that, and they talk about actually knocking off as much soil as possible from the plant that you just unpotted, and you always try and pull out those roots. Now, I don't cut off the bottom, but I scrape the bottom and make sure things are pulling out. And I also look at the plant, and you'll see major roots growing down along the side, and I try and pull those out. And you're supposed to dig the hole big enough so that you can spread things out in the hole, or get a pot big enough that things can be spread out in that pot. The idea is to give the plant some room. So you're doing the right thing, Ellen, in terms of, sort of clawing at it and getting the roots out. And what I try to do is see if they're starting to grow in a circle, you really try to pull those roots out so they don't continue to grow in a circle, because they'll strangle the plant. And I work at it pretty hard in terms of separating the roots from that ball that you pulled out of that nursery pot.
Can I ask another question about plants in pots? So I have some giant pots that I grow things in, seasonal vegetables, and the soil gets this like white fungus kind of looking stuff in it. Like, do I need to replace the soil every now and then?
You're going to ask how often to replace it. If nothing, is the plant still in it?
No, I rip them all out at the end of the season and start with something else the next year.
Okay. I tend to take my pots, pull the plant out, and with the residual soil that's in it, I just go and dump it in the garden somewhere that needs soil. I start fresh. And depending on the plant and depending on how much money I want to spend, most of the time I'll use, bagged potting soil. Sometimes I'll just use bought compost or mix it with bagged compost, because that tends to be cheaper. And it depends how big the pot is. So, but yeah, I start fresh every year, unless it's a plant that stays in the pot, and then I redress it. I mean, the Dawn Redwood that you got, that thing got redressed. I did pull it out of the pot a couple times because I knew it was root bound, and I literally cut back the roots because it was going to grow out the bottom hole if I didn't. So,
So I have, at the, I guess it was in the spring, we were doing some work up at Lusher and somebody came up with some raspberry starts. And I grabbed one and put it in a pot. And now I have I guess it's about 3 feet tall in a pot.
mhm.
So what do I do next? Should I take it out now? Should I put it in a bigger pot? I mean, I really want to grow raspberries in my yard.
Okay. Okay, do you want to grow them in your yard or you want to grow them in your lot up at Lusher?
I don't know. What's my better chance of success?
Well, sun,
Yeah.
okay. The second thing is how much space do you want to give to them? Because they will take up all the space you give to them.
Mm.
And, okay, and you should, so you could grow them in pots, pretty big pots, okay? But the thing is, about every year, you want to cut back old canes
Mhm.
by up to like 25 to 30% of the old canes you
Mhm.
cut off.
Mhm.
And cut them right down to the bottom, because what you're doing is promoting new growth.
Okay.
They will get pretty tall.
Mhm.
Now, did you actually get raspberries out of them this year?
Oh, they didn't ripen, but there are like a dozen buds at the very top. So
Okay. They tend to like space. So what see if you can get some more starts from this person and plant them at home too.
yeah.
Okay. But make sure you've got, they really require well-drained soil. And because our soil tends to be so clayey, I would, take a spot, really work it and put those in and they'll spread, because they spread by runners.
Yeah. Well,
And-
I've got we lost a lot of trees right next door and I'd love to have them be a border between my house and the walkway next door.
They can
No?
they can be messy too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just, leave, if you're going to do them as a border, it means you're going to have to probably prune them a lot during the season so that they're
Yeah.
not being a mess. So
How about pots of them in on a border?
Hmm.
How about
Yeah.
Ellen's plot? Can I put them in Ellen's plot? See if they take. She won't even notice.
They
Good
really,
stuff.
I mean, once raspberries take,
Yeah.
they're kind of a weed.
Okay. Okay. All right.
I mean, there's a reason why I put them in one of my smaller raised beds.
Uh-huh.
All that's in that bed is raspberry.
Raspberries.
Yep.
Oh,
It's a small one. It's my smallest bed. And I just, that way they're not gonna expand into something else. So,
okay.
but because I love raspberries, I'm willing to do that.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Ginny.
Okay. And by the way, if anybody grows blueberries, it's the same sort of thing. You should cut back some of the canes every year so that, it promotes growth.
Good idea.
I have a really hard time growing herbs. I've been trying to get an herb garden started. Does anybody have
Sun.
success?
Sun. And you
Sun and
don't,
nothing
I
else.
know for a fact you don't have a lot of sun.
Sun and no fertilizer.
Right. Yep. And it,
They
boy,
thrive on neglect. Most of them.
They thrive on neglect?
Oh yeah, not basil. Basil takes care of it. Yeah, sage, rosemary, thyme, all of those. No
What do you-
fertilizer.
what do you mean, Janet? How do you care for basil? Basil.
Basil needs to be taken care of, and it's a hot weather, sunny plant. So it's really not really good. Does anybody grow it inside through the winter successfully? I've never been able to do that.
not for very long.
Yeah, not for very long.
How do you care for yours?
For basil or the other ones?
For basil?
Oh, I just buy those things in the market, that you can get in the produce section that will be a live basil or basil plant. And I just put it in water on a windowsill. I have an east facing windowsill over my kitchen sink. And that goes for a long time. It'll stop after a while, but I'll probably get 2 or 3 months of fresh basil
Mhm.
cut off of that. And it's fun. And I got a Thai basil about a month ago, and it ran out of water because I didn't put it in the right place. I forgot it. And I cut it back and gave it water and stuck it in the right window, and it's thriving. So I have this little Thai basil, which is a nice spicy flavor, right on the windowsill. And all I have to do is cut a few pieces off of it and throw it in whatever, eggs or whatever.
So I'm not clear, Janet, is it just sitting in water or is it in
Yes.
dirt? It's just in
Well,
water.
there's some soil around the bottom, but you just put it in water.
Okay.
Yeah, I have it in a goblet.
Uh-huh.
I treat it with joy.
Great. Great.
Yeah, and that's true. Most of your herbs, it's neglect, but they need sun. Oh God, do they need sun? And I find sometimes if you water them too much, they just rot. So,
Ginny,
yeah,
you have a question. I have some oregano and thyme, and it's 1 4x8 bed it's just done really, really well. It's out in the sun. It's out in the middle of kind of in a field. When do you cut back? If you haven't harvested it to dry it and use it in a culinary way, when do you cut back all those herbs? Because they're
I
now.
know. You can do it now.
Yeah. Okay.
Because they've got a good root system, they'll do fine over the winter, and then they're all fresh to start in the spring. Sometimes I sort of leave them because I want to use them into the winter, and I end up cutting them back in late winter.
As you go, just kind of back as you go.
Yeah.
What about rosemary? How do you keep a rosemary plant under control? How much do you cut it back?
I dig it up and give it to my neighbor.
Bravo. Keep it in a pot.
I don't know how much of it to cut back.
I mean,
Yeah.
I treat it, you know how when you have a quote unquote gardening service and they come in and they everything is done to a mound. That's what I started to do with mine. I cut it back to a mound.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And it, when it really gets woody,
Yeah.
I've grown enough that it's gotten so woody, it's like I just pull it out, put in a new plant.
Start a
and
new one.
start
Yeah.
fresh.
Okay. I've been there with one. Yeah. 12 years. I grew one plant for 12 years.
Yeah.
And then I moved. Oh, my stars. I couldn't take it with me. The rosemary tree.
Yeah.
That's great. But I sort of like it because, it stays green all winter.
Mhm.
And it can be a big enough plant that it makes a statement in the garden.
Oh, does it ever?
So some of my neighbors love it because what I'll do is, I'll cut it back and I'll have huge bunches of rosemary and I'll just put it out in a box and people come by and take it.
Oh, that's nice. That's
Smells so good.
Yeah. But when I originally set up my garden, I used a garden designer and I told her, I said, I want easy maintenance. And that's what she did, is she put in herbs,
Yeah.
lots of them. And I still have them. And that was back in 2013.
Yeah.
Which ones? Which herbs? Besides
Thyme.
rosemary?
Rosemary, thyme,
Sage?
yeah, sage. And sage has been funny. I moved it around because it tends to, sometimes if it's happy, it takes over everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
I made the mistake of putting it in my raised beds.
Mhm.
And every year I have to hack it back. I'm talking, I take a foot or more off of it. I mean, so that's another reason why you grow up by neglect, because it can be, sage can become a weed
Mhm.
if you treat it well.
What about something like, have you ever grown germander? Or bergamot, any of those kinds of herbs?
No, I haven't.
Okay. I saw a hedge of germander once
Wow.
is out in front. She had a row of about 15 plants.
Mhm.
And when they were all in bloom and they were about 18 inches tall, it was so pretty.
Yeah.
It was really a gorgeous thing. Have to do something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Give us your favorite things to grow, vegetables I'm talking about, most successful, and then things you wouldn't bother, don't grow well here.
Okay. It's funny, but I want squash, but one plant is enough. And I tend to grow zucchini because it's so easy. I can ignore it as long as I water it. It keeps growing. I have my nephew. He'll grow delicata squash, but you got to have space. These things just take over everything. But delicata squash is a neat squash, and it's again sun and water, and it's happy. Tomatoes. Your smaller tomatoes. This year I grew Roma tomatoes for the first time. Very successful. I'm like, one plant and I made a big pot of sauce out of it. So cherry tomatoes, I've been very successful with cherry tomatoes. I love fresh beets. So, but again, you have to make sure you've got really well-drained soil to do it. You have to, watch them for pests and stuff because the slugs love them. I don't bother with peas. They're not my thing. I grow scarlet runner beans for hummingbirds, and they do very well. I can grow them anywhere in the garden. It doesn't have to be in the vegetable garden. It can be anywhere. And I'll just put up a huge support, one that's like 5 feet, 6 feet tall, and plant scarlet runner beans, and they take off and the hummingbirds love them. And then I just let it go. I don't harvest the beans. I hate the beans. To me, they don't taste good. I'm just looking, what else? To be honest, I'm more of a fruit person. So I have a lot, raspberries, blueberries, and strawberries. Now the strawberries can be a little harder in this climate, depending on how wet it is, but everything's been so dry. mine did much better this year.
Mm.
But it meant I had to water them. They do require water.
What about rhubarb?
Yes. And if rhubarb gets established here, it can get really big. So I have a rhubarb I don't use for eating purposes, but purely as a interest plant. And it's done very well. In fact, I think I need to move it because it grows over one of my paths and gets in the way. And if you go to a good nursery, there's a lot of different types of rhubarbs. You don't have to get the usual one with the red stem. There's a lot of different ones.
What nursery would you suggest?
I go to, what's her name? At the traffic circle on Stafford. Is that Cordell's? I think is the name.
was, yeah.
Cordell's.
It was. It's Stafford Hills now, I think.
Okay, so I go there.
Me too.
And the other thing I do, I go to, because I was a master gardener, I go to the advertised plant sales for the Master Gardeners, the Hardy Plant Society. When they have their sales, sometimes you can get really good vegetables and unusual vegetables there.
Garden clubs too. Any of the in the spring, all the garden clubs will have sales.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And I mean, once in a while, hey, I'm doing Home Depot and Lowe's. I mean, if you're looking for basic kale, they even have a big variety of kale. And so what I find with kale in my raised beds, kale winter's over. I can harvest it all year round. So that is, I do grow a lot of kale. I grow it as much for eating as for when it flowers. The birds like the seeds in the flowers.
So do the aphids.
Yeah, that's true.
Ugh.
Yes.
So does my daughter's chickens like the kale too.
Yeah, yes, they would. But I think, aren't they going after what's growing on them?
Oh, they rip it up. I watch. I throw
Oh,
it in there.
really?
It's really fun to take vegetables, especially, if something's getting out of control, just chop it up and take it over to whoever has chickens and throw it in there and watch them. They just love it. It's fresh greens, they just love them.
Yeah. I set up a lot of pretty large raised beds and a lot of them. And I have gradually filled them with flowers because vegetable gardening is, it's a lot of work.
Ginny, you were talking about winter vegetables, the chards. There's several different kinds of
Yes.
chards that are really good that I'm growing. And if you grow your beets, you can always use beet greens. When you harvest the beet, don't forget the beet greens. They're very good and really nutritious. And what else did we grow? Lettuces. I'm growing romaine and curly leaf lettuce now that's doing really well. I just harvest from the outside. They'll go all winter. And I put in 2 red cabbage. I have a bed. I live up in Ridgefield, Washington, and I have a little bed in a community garden right down in town. And I want to make the bed look pretty. I don't want it to just be full of, so I'm trying to make it look pretty. So the pretty vegetables in the wintertime, they look nice,
Yeah.
So I'm having a lot of success with all of those. And I also just put in, I put some cilantro in. We'll see how it goes. I don't know how it's going to do, but what do you think? Is it going to go this winter, or is it going to die?
I mean, cilantro is one of those things, it's a little on the delicate side, but if you're willing to cover it in the really hard freeze times, it might do fine.
Yeah, I'll give that a try.
So cabbage. I've done cabbage early in, early spring and been very successful with it. Now, a lot of the things that we've been talking about, they're slug feasts. I mean, for slugs, and I have slug issues and snail issues. So I'm fighting slugs a lot. So I'm a big believer in putting out beer traps.
Yes.
So I mean, I would say I'm constantly watching when it's going to rain. So as soon as it stops raining, I put out another batch of beer traps in order to control the slugs. Because, yeah, I won't tell you how many times I've put out either tiny new plants or new seedlings for vegetables, and they're just mowed down by slugs.
Yeah.
So the reason I like beer, I have 2 dogs. They'll get into anything that's on the ground. So I'd rather them get into beer than any slug bait.
Sure.
Even the organic stuff and the safe stuff. I just use beer traps. Now,
Are tuna cans big enough or does it need to be a little bit bigger?
no, tuna cans are fine. You just have to remember to bury them in the ground
Right.
so that the slug can get into them.
Mhm.
The other thing you have to think about is how much beer you're going to buy. So
Cheap beer, no special
Right.
stuff.
Yes.
for me,
Peter.
Ever tried just mixing up yeast and flour and water?
Not for slugs. I haven't tried that.
That
I
doesn't,
hadn't tried that actually.
Might work. That might work.
Yeah, because apparently it's the yeast and I think the hops they like. One of the things I do is, when you get the tiny sauce containers with takeout food.
Yeah.
I save all those containers. They're just about the right size and they're easy to bury. You don't have to use a lot of beer, to make it deep enough. And so, because a tuna can, that's a lot of beer.
That's a lot of beer.
I use cottage cheese containers for
Yeah.
the slugs, and I cut a hole in the side, make a flap,
Mhm.
and I bury it an inch in the ground, and I put an inch of beer in it and open those little flaps and paint them black. I spray painted them black so you can't see them. I put the top on the thing so nothing else can get in there to get to the thing. Oh man, they just fill up with slugs. Grand fun to go out there and open that thing up and say, oh yeah.
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 There's a lot of gratification. And the other thing, my part of my gratification is you take the old beer and stuff and you toss it and that there's animals out there that are eating them. So it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah. And, in terms of pests, people ask me about powdery mildew and stuff like that. On squash and things, I just ignore it because the squash is going to go away anyway. I had powdery mildew on my dahlias this year, and this was the first time it ever happened to me. In fact, I had a couple of plants in the front of the house, not near the vegetable garden, and it killed them. I mean, they just drooped and died. So the problem with powdery mildew is what you want is airflow and sun is what takes, but there are certain plants like a zucchini or a lot of your squash plants, they will get powdery mildew. There's nothing you can do about it. It's not worth dealing with it.
And it doesn't hurt the fruit.
Correct.
Yeah, the fruit's fine. So it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. So that's about, vegetable gardening for me. I just grow the things that are really important to me and try not to put too much in because you're going to have to deal with it some way. And I find that the lesson I learned is to keep it small. Don't expand your vegetable garden. It's too much work.
Thanks, everybody. This was
Thank
awesome.
you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ginny.
Yeah, Ginny, this is wonderful.
No, that slug trap thing, I'm doing that.